how we might reach, excuse me, I've lost my presentation. There we go. How we might reach carbon neutrality and achieve that by 2030. The plan is set up with an executive summary and then links to many appendices. It's highly graphical in nature, about 20 to 30 pages in terms of the executive summary when you include the different acknowledgements. And the appendices you can see here a little more clearly. The ones with checks we've addressed to some degree. So we'll be focusing today a little bit more on the actual analysis of onward and upward in a little more detail, the accessibility analysis we've done and the financial plan. But as a reminder, there are several resources that'll be ongoing coming out of this effort. We have the vehicle miles travel calculator. We have a workshop scheduled on March 29th. Hope you can all make that. The regional model is updated, now working. It's being used on some intersection analysis at Butler and Forth right now. It seems to be working fairly well, so we're pleased with that. There is the literature review, which is kind of at the core of how we would use the calculator in the model, an EV or electric vehicle readiness plan, and this accessibility methodology. We did have, robust public involvement, and public comment period is kind of the culmination of that. In very broad terms, there's support for existing onward policies through voter approved plans and transportation taxes, and general support for the upward policies and direction, though the final cost was not presented broadly to the public for their consideration. And as we know, that cost is significant. So now I'd like to just go through onward and how it performs. And remember, this is our status quo, staying within the available budget. That's our fiscal constraint, and it increases VMT considerably by 2030. The policies are existing. So there's the Flagstaff Regional Plan, and what you see here but can't read is the growth illustration map. And generally speaking, the plan calls for density, compact development, mixed use, and activity centers. The activity centers are the many circles you can see, but you can't really see the future urban growth because it's kind of a wash in that sea of, I guess that's a yellow color for suburban, and then the uncolored areas, which are largely rural. So in the context or comparison to desires for carbon neutrality, there's not a lot of future urban growth, which would help us achieve reduced VMT. As far as transportation, in both the plan here, but also in Blueprint 2040, our current regional transportation plan, we call for a lot of arterial density and redundancy. There's been an amendment to the regional plan for active transportation. In the regional plan, there's a policy that calls for equality of modes. And it also sets out mode priorities by area type, those area types being urban, suburban, rural, and activity center. And propositions 419 and 420 are largely supportive of this plan. And those are the transportation sales taxes for road, streets, bike, and ped, and the Lone Tree Overpass, respectively. There's a financial analysis or plan that goes to support our current situation. And this is a summary table that's in that financial plan. Again, you can link to that via the appendices. And based on review of the city's or the various capital improvement plans, things were put into a short, mid, and long-term bucket in terms of their expenditures and revenue estimates, short-term being 0 to 5 years, mid 5 to 10, and long-term beyond 10 to 2045. You can see for the city, there's a substantial shortfall in both the short and midterm, and a substantial surplus at the end. A couple things to note about that surplus at the end is that does include 5 years, that 2040 to 2045 years of revenue, which is about $90 million based on the assumptions made and provided by the city through 2040. Our transportation taxes end in 2040. So we have about a $40 million surplus, or $30 to $40 million surplus within that tax horizon. And then you see a circle around the balance for the county. The analysis, financial analysis for the county was done with revenues at the entire county level, but the expenditure is really looking at the Metro Plan projects. So a lot of revenue exceeding those limited expenditures. And then Mountain Line, basically, we see, you know, they spend what they get and do it well. So they're not really building surpluses or experiencing shortfalls. But we do have a present reality when we look at expenditures, and that is inflation. I think all of us are experiencing that personally, and those in the construction business are really seeing that in spades. We did inflate the unit costs in our cost model. However, we are seeing recent bids showing costs outpacing those, and you can see this rate of inflation from an ADOT table indicating 76% increase between 2017 and 2022. So very real situation, and it's difficult to project that forward. So as we look into detail at the different member agencies, this is Flagstaff revenues. You can see the ones that we have listed here, Proposition 406 being the road safety, road repair and safety initiative, 419 being the general streets, Proposition 420, the overpass. And then you see highway user revenue funds, vehicle license tax, and a first mile, last mile grant. We do assume extensions for these propositions out to 2045, with the exception of Prop 420. And the plan, although not indicated in the tables, we do reference in the plan the Downtown Mile Infra Grant. Here are the projects from Proposition 419. We also included in the other category Beulah Boulevard extension. And we got this information from the Capital Improvement Program and the TIP. You can see the circles around Lone Tree and Beulah. Those are two projects for which we have some bids, and they are considerably higher than the numbers you see here. So here's just a little comparison. You can see the shortfalls in the short midterm and the surplus in the long term. So given the uncertainty with inflation in particular, just need to monitor expenses. There are options to manage the shortfall, and the city is very aware of these, but debt financing to bring some of that surplus forward and cover the expenses of the shortfalls, pushing projects out to the outer years where revenues are more available, or adjusting scope. Should that surplus materialize, options would be to advance the active transportation master plan projects, since that's a recent inclusion into regional plan policy, safety investments, or intelligent transportation service solutions. And of course, there's always those unforeseen expenses. For the county, here's the revenues, Proposition 403, HERF, and VLT. Approaching $750 million. It was interesting to see that the revenues for the city were exceeding $1 billion. So we're talking about real money. The projects for the county, you can see listed here. And again, reminder that the revenues are countywide, expenditures are for just the Metro Plan region. And this, of course, gives the county flexibility for managing those funds across geography. where they see needs or revenue issues. For Mountain Line, kind of a simple graphic here. As I said earlier, they do a pretty good job of spending what they receive and doing that effectively. They do maintain a fund balance. And we are looking at an extension of existing taxes, but not assuming any new taxes for Mountain Line in terms of our fiscal constraint. I'm going to pause here because member Dunno did submit some comments, and I'd like to pose a question. So there was a concern in the financial plan that we had, I guess, perhaps over summarized capital expenditures in terms of just one lump sum that included everything. Or it could have been interpreted that she would like to see needs expressed, which would be perhaps more in the upward. So if she could maybe take a moment and explain what she's hoping to see, and perhaps we can accommodate that request.
Dave, is that
a question to you
about? Okay.
Yeah. So your comment about capital needs beyond rolling stock.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, I guess really it came out of looking at the overall packet. So the comment really was about under the Nelson Nygaard report, section 4. Well, I should back it up. Section 2 of the city projects identified the prop, I think it was prop 411, which I believe is related to the transit. And so I guess her question was, projects that are under that section, did they assume using those revenues to help with transit improvements? Because I guess more broadly, our question comes out of where's the acknowledgement of the need for transit infrastructure within the like road type projects, for example? Is that something that is being carried under what's identified under the city's tables, or is that something that maybe we're missing it completely? So it's kind of an open-ended question, I guess. I don't know if that's really helping.
Okay, so let me see if I understand that. So you see capital needs such as, and I think in your email you mentioned bus lanes or pullouts,
bus stops,
and how those are being accommodated. Which funding stream are those being accommodated out of? Is that your question? And how we acknowledge that in the financial plan?
Right, and that goes back to the goals of the reducing VMT, and some of this infrastructure helps support that goal. So that was kind of how that question came out.
I'll see if I'll take a stab at that, and then maybe we can clarify it in the plan, but I'd appreciate a response from the city. I believe as Proposition 419 was set up, it was intended to pay for multimodal improvements. So certainly bike and pedestrian infrastructure were included in the costs of those. And, you know, bike and ped infrastructure that was perhaps distinct from those larger capital projects like the Lone Tree widening, you know, had their own kind of designated share of that. But that multimodality was to address transit needs. I don't know that we, at the time, had anything like bus lanes, you know, dedicated bus lanes identified. I'm confident of that. But I would think that bus pullouts would be accommodated. So I'll see if Paul Mood or Jeff Bauman have a response to that.
Yeah, Dave, this is Jeff. The way you're describing the way the project 419 and 420 cost estimates were put together, that's correct. We had assumed, I'll just use the term complete streets, but all of the things that we envisioned in 2018 that would go on those streets, which at the time were traditional bike lanes and 5 or 6 foot sidewalks, all the bus stuff, the normal bus stuff, which I would say is kind of as you describe, bus stops, bus pullouts. Probably nothing really beyond that was considered. In that yeah, as Dave said, we definitely didn't have any bus lane scope in any of the projects. And we didn't have the separated bike lane scoped, but we're so far able to accommodate that.
Excellent.
That's kind of a change from what we had.
Okay, thank you, Member Bauman. I will take note of that and put that in the financial plan as make sure it's at least a footnote to say how costs are being accommodated. So, Member Dono, did you have any other questions or comments?
So that I think answers my question is really so the program that was under that table 3, and again, this is that Nelson Nygaard attachment, not what we're looking at, I don't think on this screen. It basically does include more standard bus stops, like if you're doing a corridor or road project, bus stops and potentially bus pullouts if that's warranted. And I understand no bus lanes. So that would be helpful to add that footnote in there.
Okay.
If the TAC is finds that acceptable. And then I did have a couple of other comments. So I don't know if you want me to share the other ones that I had shared.
Yeah, let's go ahead and put those on the table so that the full TAC, if we approve this, if the TAC approves it, we can approve it with the changes noted. So please do.
Cool. Okay, let's see. I handled the one. Oh, the other one is in section 2, again, of the Nelson Nygaard report. If Prop 411 should be deleted from that. In other words, are we double counting that funding? Because that funding shows up under section 4.0 for transit, but it also is referenced under section 2.0. And so just wanted to clarify, assuming the money's not being double counted or just trying to follow that path.
I think the recommendation will be to double check that.
Okay.
I can't do that on the fly, but I think that's a good observation. We'll need to make sure that's reflected accurately.
Great. That was one another item. The other one was a question about the name of the tax. Prop 411 was just, again, you may not be able to answer that in this meeting, but just clarifying the name of that Prop 411 tax. Okay, I think sorry, I'm reading my list backwards. The other couple of items are pretty minor, little more of a deletion of removing transit in front of on page 3 of kind of the entrance page introduction, removing the transit in front of Charlie Odegaard's name,
right,
and dropping transit. That was one that just calling us Mountain Line. That was the other one. Sorry, I'm reading out of order. And the other items were just check marking eligibility for grants. One was that Mountain Line is eligible for RAISE grants, so add us to the checklist there. And same thing with TIFIA.
Okay, thank you. And I think those last two have to do with our standard funding.
Oh, okay. They're not in this document.
Okay. In Stride Forward. So we'll make that correction for our standard funding sheet. Okay,
Awesome.
Thank you. With that, I'll proceed. So how did Onward do, or how does Onward do? You can see here, it does not reach the VMT targets, where we're 18% over the target. If we look at the region, 22%. If we look at Flagstaff specifically, does not reach the greenhouse gas emission targets or the MOCHR target. You can see the MOCHR target for the carbon neutrality is 54%. We only hit 13%. And there's no target set for vehicle hours of travel, but you can see significant 96,000 hours of travel. How that plays out on the roads, most of our arterials are congested. Interstate ramps, particularly at Country Club and Butler, are problematic. We do add some resiliency with the addition of some of these connections. I'll let you stare at this map a little bit. In terms of how this compares to Blueprint 2040, pretty much the same results as it is pretty much the same plan. But you can see a lot of roads congested, number of spots and significant sections heavily congested and gridlocked. For upward, we're looking at maintaining VMT at 2019 levels through a variety of strategies. And this is an unconstrained concept. We do this by shifting 50% of new jobs and residences to these focus areas downtown and on 4th Street, which allows for shorter trips, which makes for less VMT by driving, as well as shorter trips that can be accommodated by walking and biking. So we make numerous investments, more buses more often, more bike lanes, more sidewalks and crossings, and we apply travel demand management, or TDM, to achieve that VMT reduction. And you can see a list of strategies. We assume all of these are applied and applied well, and put on top of what we estimate to be a 3% reduction as a result of work from home that's taking place now. And VMT success. So you can see how the different strategies perform here to get us to that 17% reduction. We were hoping for 16. So we do well. If we look at it in light of these targets, we outperform the target for these investments. You can see the comparison referring back to the earlier table for onward. A note on greenhouse gas emission, even though we don't hit the target, if a 30% EV market share by 2030 is assumed, if that's one of the assumptions or calculations in the carbon neutrality plan, you actually do achieve that greenhouse gas emission target. Mode share, because we hit the VMT target, we stopped at that 31.6%. So our estimate is that you don't need to quite reach that 54% in order to hit your targets. And then you can see a significant reduction in vehicle hours of travel compared to the onward. I do not have a level of service map for upward, but if you just look at the significant reductions in both VMT and VHT compared to onward, one can imagine that the level of service is improved. But it does, all that improvement comes at a cost, doubling transit to about $25 million per year out to 2030, which is an important qualifier. Quadrupling bike and pedestrian facilities is what we estimated it would take to achieve those mode shares and VMT reductions. It's about $53 million a year. This is basically doubling what's in the active transportation master plan for its entire scope of projects. Travel demand management, we are going to be seeking a coordinator for TDM at MetroPlan, where we have a carbon reduction program grant, federal grant for 5 years. And so we'll be implementing some of the TDM. Again, probably need some additional funding to achieve that. As far as achieving the community design objectives to focus development in those target areas, there's some regulatory things that could be done, targeting investments that could be done, but there may be some other costs associated with that. We can see just estimating some of the taxes that would be required to achieve that. It's a significant, almost fourfold increase. in the transportation taxes. However, this was looking at a regional perspective. We would expect by focusing this more towards the city goal, which the carbon neutrality plan focuses on, would bring that down. And would also be significant investment on the private side and grants that would be available that could bring that down as well. That's just to put it in perspective. So the policies in Upward really are about amplifying and targeting the policies that we see in Onward. And you can see that there are three broad categories for funding: transportation and community design, focusing on ped, bike, and transit, both on transportation side, as well as designing our community from a land use perspective to support those modes. Transitioning now into the Title VI and environmental justice section, you can see some language here from Title VI on non-discrimination. It has been expanded since its original inception to include age and disability. And environmental justice was an executive order that addressed low minority populations. So we did something new, and we're still have a lot to learn. But at a census tract level, looking at the region, it's a very busy map, but you can see that most of the region has 2 or more Title VI communities present. Of those groups, age, race, limited English, and so on. And that one can imagine that as we go to the rural areas, low densities and lack of infrastructure makes it more challenging to do that. So what we did was evaluate access to services by travel time, by different modes via the available network. So if there's no transit route, you can't get there via transit. We looked at bike, pedestrian, transit, and automobile, and the transit access includes walk and wait times. We looked at access to these services: groceries, parks and recreation, medical education, and then came up with a composite service access score for each mode. For the Title VI, we looked at the classes I've mentioned, and if they were 15% higher, 15% higher than the regional average, we considered them a Title VI zone. So we classified our traffic analysis zones this way. We did eliminate a very low population traffic analysis zone, so we didn't skew averages too much. And then if it had 3 or more of the classes, we classified it as Title VI. The reason we did that is, if you recall that previous map, there are Title VI communities pretty much all across the region. And then we determined if it was underserved, if it was below the regional average for travel time. This is an example of a travel time assessment by bike to grocery store locations. For those of us who live to the northeast, Dollar General did not make the list. It doesn't have fresh vegetables, so we didn't include it as a grocery store. But basically, using the bicycle network, what does it take to get to a grocery store? And you can see it's in 5-minute increments out to 30 minutes. And, as you get further outside the central part of town, access becomes more and more limited. So when we do the analysis as described, these TAZs, traffic analysis zones, that have the 3 or more Title VI classes present would be considered underserved by bicycle in this case. And what you see in that dark line is the urban or urbanized area. So it has a certain density and contiguity to it. And so not surprisingly for bicycles in particular, that accessibility goes down as you leave that urbanized area. When we look at transit, you see a very similar pattern. You know, kind of toggle back and forth there. This is vehicular access. Again, similar pattern, and likewise with walking access. Although with walking, you can see some internal urbanized TAZs that have limited access. So this is a new methodology, presents, I think, a lot of opportunities for prioritization criteria as we look where we spend our money. Certainly a deeper dive by class, Title VI class, and by mode, and even by service. To understand this. And I think it's also has some applicability to land use planning. Where access is weak, we can look at network improvements, and where networks aren't practical, programmatic approaches. And this would be things like Mountain Line's taxi voucher program that they do in cooperation with the county. So this concludes the presentation. As you can see, Onward is fiscally constrained, moving forward with existing policies, but it doesn't meet several policy goals, particularly in carbon neutrality. Upward, not fiscally constrained, but it does meet those goals, or many of them. Upward, we know there's a lot of high potential in some of these strategies, but also a great deal of uncertainty. Funding being amongst the most of those, or the greatest of those. So this would suggest a multifaceted approach as we look at carbon neutrality to move forward on all fronts with frequent monitoring to see what's working and stress those. And as I just mentioned, the equitable delivery transportation, I think there's great potential in the tools that we've developed. And we do see some shortcoming in those in access for different modes, but I think there's policies that are needed to ascertain the degree to which they need to be addressed. So what we're looking for today is approval of the release of Stride Forward with the comments from Member Deno and any others that might be made. So with that, I will stop and see if there are any questions, but thank you for your time.
Dave, this is Nate. I got a question on the plan. Yeah. Going back to the bike level of service in terms of how close grocery stores are at and underserved kind of communities based on how close you are to a grocery store. Is it the assumption that everybody is going to be able to fit their grocery bill on their bike? A family of 4 being able to fit your grocery order on a bike and ride a few miles with it?
That's a fair question. It's really a question of whether you can access it in a certain amount of time. Granted, family of 4 might need several trips to the grocery store, or special trailer accessory.
So that would increase your time, right?
Well, not somebody like you. I mean, it's
no, somebody like me is definitely getting out of shape.
Yeah, I think that's a qualifier. Yes, if you're taking more trips, or if you're slowed down by a trailer.
So the the kind of baseline assumption is that you're a single bicycle trip to the grocery store and back. That's what that assumption is.
Yeah,
It's not multiple trips or anything of that nature.
right.
Dave, this is Paul Mood. Can we go back to there was a slide with the housing? It had the two circles on it.
Oh, right.
So how would you get the 50% of new jobs and residences in those focus areas? Is that even, I mean, 50% of new residences, is there even availability there, or even the possibility for availability of that housing there?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. We did do a, assessment of current density and future density with that type of growth. And the densities are, I think they're well below 15 dwelling units per acre in terms of the average across the area for the target traffic analysis zones. And there are, quite a few vacant parcels still in the downtown as well as in the 4th Street area of size, and some that would be ripe for redevelopment. As far as achieving that, some of the things I mentioned earlier, I'll repeat. If you focus your transportation investments there, would be one incentive. There are things like transfer of development rights, where you could have a receiving zone. These could be receiving zones, and you could transfer rights from areas where you don't want to see growth occur. There's certainly administrative costs in managing something like that. And there could be some other regulatory benefits. The city already employs some, such as reduced resource protection, reduced parking, and those could be accelerated. Those would all be carrots. There could be some sticks in terms of harsher restrictions on infrastructure investment outside of growth zones. There could be sticks where would not be easy in this state, but if you actually looked at down zoning some areas where you don't want density to occur, that would promote development to look at density elsewhere. So hopefully that answers your question in part.
Yeah. I just wanted to make sure it was looked at.
Okay.
Dave, I have another question.
And I also see, Mr. Chair, I also see questions, hands up from Michelle McNulty and Dunno. So when just want to bring that to your attention.
Yeah, and go ahead.
This is actually a segue to Paul's question. A while back during this process, MetroPlan identified some very high-level policies around some of these components from a land use perspective. And there was sort of a list that the TAC was able to look at. And then I believe what we ended up doing is we rolled up those very high level policies that you have now included. So it was just maybe a comment to Paul that if you wanted to look back in that list, because I recall there was some pretty good recommendations, in that list, achieve some of these outcomes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Michelle, your hand is raised.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to, I think you alluded to it, Dave, when you mentioned in this day it's hard, but downsizing and sticks are nearly impossible just because of Proposition 207, and specifically downsizing. I don't think there's an appetite to do that. Just so if a lot of your assumptions are based on that, we need to talk. And then just a more of an FYI, we've already received some just in the regional planning conversations, we've definitely heard loud and clear from one very vocal neighbor in the downtown area, a reluctance to see the density in the downtown because of cut through traffic to the historic neighborhoods. I'm not saying that I agree with that individual. I'm just letting you know that there is a very fierce opponent of growth in the downtown. And I'm sure you're fully aware of that, but just wanted to let you know they're already actively letting us know their opinions. So
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you.
And then Dave, I have another question. With the taxes associated with this plan, what happens if the taxes are not approved by the voters for this plan? How does this plan then get implemented? Because it looks like it's a pretty hefty ask in terms of increase of taxes.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point and perhaps requires some additional clarification. So what's being adopted as our plan is the onward plan. It's basically a continuation of Blueprint 2040 with direction to move towards upward as much as possible, absent funding. The upward concept was really illustrative for the purposes of what will it take, defining a little more clearly what it will take to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. It is not the recommended plan. Again, it's illustrative. So the city, the county, perhaps even the state can look at what would be needed and consider whether they want to reach for those and then or ask their voters to reach for those. But we're not at this point recommending that they take those to the voters or that this is our direction. Again, we have to be fiscally constrained and we don't have the funding for the upward concept.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more discussion to be had on Dave's presentation on the upward presentation? Michelle, you have a question?
Yeah, I just have one last question, Dave. I know we've talked about it with the upward model, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but does this plan take into account maintenance costs?
For upward, it does not. So it is a good point. And I'll double check that is actually referenced in the upward appendix.
Thanks.
All right, any other discussion? Does anybody want to make a recommendation to move forward the Stride Forward Regional Transportation Plan public comment March 22nd through April 2nd with the amendments that Ann presented, and then the amendment to the, what was that, table of contents that you're going to put it in, Dave, or an amendment to it stating that the cost does not include
the upward maintenance costs.
Yep, does not include the upward maintenance cost.
So moved. This is Ann.
This is Michelle. I'll second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor of moving forward the Stride Forward Regional Transportation Plan for public comment for March 2nd and April 2nd with the two amendments previously discussed, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed, say aye. All right, I think that concludes that agenda item. All right, Michelle, it sounds like you're here now. Would you like to take over the rest of the meeting as the chairwoman?
Sure, thanks. And you were doing a great job. So
That's what I'm here for.
I appreciate you being there.
No problem.
So I see that we have the executive board agenda review, and Mandia or Dave, are one of you going to do that for Miles?
Sure.
Okay.
So the big item for March 2nd is going to be stride forward and having the board release this plan for public comment. There will be and Mandy, can you bring up the agenda,
Yes, give me just a second.
please?
Great. Can you see it okay?
Yeah, so because, yes, thank you, because the February executive board meeting was canceled, we're going to cover some things that have already been covered by the TAC, the ADOT performance measures, the Lone Tree Planning Environmental Linkage Study, the Rural Transportation Advocacy Council, getting a member voted into that. Some tip amendments, including the downtown, including the Downtown Connection Center, as well as the Southwest Infrastructure Raise Grant. That's Beulah Boulevard, basically connecting from Woodlands Village south to the interchange in association with the Northern Arizona Healthcare. And then stride forward adoption. We'll be mentioning a number of things, and I think we'll probably discuss some of those here briefly. One of the board members is interested in hearing about wildlife corridors. We'll discuss some of the things that are available now in the IIJA federal bill. An update on the Regional Transportation Safety Plan. And I'll give just a quick update on that. We're out in front of the public now with a survey. It's going very well. We have probably close to 400 responses by now, I'd guess, to the survey. And we'll be going out in about 10 days with our social pinpoint tool, which is actually the ability for people to place on a map where they see or aware of safety concerns. You know, kind of the good news, which I think everybody's heard by now, but if you haven't, MetroPlan received a Safe Streets and Roads for All planning grant. This is a grant that Mandy put together. It's going to focus on vulnerable road users, or so bike and ped. So it's really going to augment that regional, the regional safety plan that's underway now. And then staffing updates. Again, I think everybody's heard Miles Beck is retiring, looking at March 2nd. So the board meeting is his last day. There are interviews for an interim director scheduled, and the full-time director or permanent director job is posted. We did do interviews for a business manager, but may let the new director either go out again or make the decision, and have postponed the TDM coordinator that I referenced in Stride Forward again until these upper level positions are settled in. Federal and state funding. I think the big update on state funding is there is a bill put together by our TAC, which would fund out of the state surplus numerous projects across rural Arizona. I'm not going to remember all of them locally offhand, but one is for flood control improvements along 180 and others for flood control project improvements along 89. I believe money for Lone Tree, that south section that's covered by the Pell, and also for improvements to the John Wesley Powell Bridge over I-40. That's come out of a House committee with strong support. So keep our fingers crossed for that one. I'll look to Mandia and Sandra to see if they have anything else that they would add to any of that.
I do not. I think you covered it. Thank you.
Mhm. And just in case I haven't met you, I'm Sandra and I was hired in mid-December and I'm a transportation planner, and hello. That's all I have.
Yeah, Sandra Tavel. Sorry, Sandra. And
okay.
Sandra's working on the on grant writing in general, and more specifically on the creative local match, tailored mostly towards transit. There is a lot of new federal money out there, and we really need to be sure that we have the local match available to draw it down so that we can adequately compete. And so that's one of the primary projects that Sandra is working on.
Thank you.
Okay. Madam Chair, that is what I have for you today.
Great, thank you for that. All right, I'm trying to get my agenda back up. So moving on to item C, any items from Metro Plan staff?
Not that we haven't already covered. And no, so nothing at this time.
Okay. Then moving on to item D, does anyone have any items to discuss for future agenda items?
Madam Chair, this is Anne.
Yes.
I have an item that Metro Plan could consider as a future maybe just a TAC discussion. Curious if partners would be interested in exploring membership with NATCO and looking at the value of that organization in terms of policy and influencing change at policy level at the national transportation level. It's, obviously has some really good trainings. So wondering if we could put that on a future agenda, just for a general discussion. And I understand there could be, if there's interest, there's membership and there's fees and all of that. And that could be part of that discussion, I guess, to explore, but wanted to put that out there. And the other item I just have is a general comment for those that are following at the state level transportation policies. There's some interesting challenging policies that are being proposed against VMT down at the state level. So if you're interested, just check out, I could forward it to Dave, our ASTA transit organization kind of tracks legislation that's related to transportation. We could share that out with the TAC if you're curious. There's a bill that would make it illegal essentially to have VMT goals with any transportation type of policy. So that's one, I think that's up for consideration. And then I believe that's the one that mainly could potentially impact what we do. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I could respond to that briefly, because I think it does have a bearing on Stride Forward. We're going to adopt Stride Forward, I believe, before legislation is passed. But part of Stride Forward's intent through the upward analysis of the upward concept was to inform regional plan policy going forward. And there is legislation out there that would restrict a regional plan from including bike lanes and bike trails and from investments, and this is where some clarification is needed, that would affect roadway capacity or emergency vehicle response times. I think that part might have been amended out, but fairly restrictive in terms of impacts on general planning. And certainly, since much of the upward concept is targeted at VMT reduction, the legislation that Anne referenced is very relevant.
I see that Nate's hand is up. Nate, did you have something on this topic or were you going to move on?
Oh, you're
And
muted.
you're on mute.
I have something on this topic as well.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
something that I would like to ask the TAC to see if we want to put on the agenda. The county is going to be working with the ADOT to do an update to the I-40 design concept report out in Belmont. So I don't know if this is a good forum to discuss that, Dave, or if a individual conversation needs to be had first, and if that's something that we want to bring to the TAC.
Madam Chair, Member Reisner, I would say both. I know I have an email in my queue from you on this topic. Let's talk about it, but I think this would be a good forum to help discuss maybe, some of the scope perspectives that our members have, and to see, the process, hear about the process that you hope to enjoin with ADOT. So I think it'd be a good topic.
Okay. And then the other thing, the county is looking at utilizing some kind of alternative methods for base stabilization on some upcoming road projects. We're looking at utilizing a product called lithified technologies. It's basically a concrete treated base. And then we're also looking at utilizing a product called lignin, which is a byproduct of pulpwood manufacturing. So pine pulp produces this polymer called lignin, and we're looking at utilizing that to stabilize bases as well, instead of doing the traditional remove existing bases and bringing in virgin aggregate. So that might be something that the TAC is interested in. We're doing this because we've lost a couple of our local mines up here for AB base, and then our cost of our base, our aggregate base, went up by about 35% this past year. So we can get a reduction in construction costs and utilize the material that's already in the ground by stabilizing it a little bit better. I think that'll be it'll make for a greener road construction and also a cost savings for municipalities and agencies up here.
We've got a lot to talk about. That I think is a good topic too.
Okay.
This is Michelle. I'd like to kind of go back to the discussion about the legislature. There's also a House Bill 1117 that's to do with zoning and more specifically targeted at housing and under the name of affordability, although there's really nothing tying any of the changes to affordable housing. It's more just removing a lot of barriers or perceived barriers. But I think why it might be of interest to this group is that I think if it were passed in the condition that it's in, it could really restrict our ability to be more intentional about where we see density. It would basically require us to rezone the entire city to 80 feet, which currently our limitation by right is 65. And it would effectively require us to approve any density, as much density or greater than the last project approved. So essentially, and we're still unclear if we could require TIAs because it would force us to approve rezones, even if they don't match with our general plan. So I do see that having a lot of impacts to Dave, how you guys are looking at the regional plan and being more specific and intentional. So I think that it's probably just an interrelated conversation. So I'd like to add that. And then I guess I'm wondering, I know like the city has a lobbyist. Does Metro Plan have a lobbyist that's tracking this?
We do.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I think this legislation, broadly speaking, is valuable to bring to this group so people are aware because it does have all of these things that we've mentioned have bearing on the regional plan process, which is going to set policy for much of the city and the county. So I think that is a presentation, and perhaps we can see if maybe our lobbyist is available to present on that, or if one of the city or county intergovs is available. And then I'll bring to your attention, Madam Chair, since I have the floor, we will be bringing the coordinated plan. That's the plan that looks at transit service for the elderly and disabled. We'll be bringing that to you next month, and looking for the board to adopt that at their April meeting.
Great, thank you. It looks like we're going to have a pretty full agenda in March.
Okay.
All right.
Madam Chair, I don't believe we have anything else on the agenda, so.
All right.
Put it back to you.
Okay. Any closing business? All right. Our next scheduled TAC is March 22nd at 1:30. With that, if there's no objection, we can, it's 2:42 and we can adjourn.
Thank you all for your time today.
Thanks. Hope everybody stays warm.
All right, thank you.
Thank you all.